Thanks for tuning in to the Urban Scope podcast. I'm back with more hip hop news. And I've seen this debate on the 520 podcast. So shout out to the 520 podcast and Club 520 podcast. And I've seen this debate about who is the better hip hop group. Now they talked about Bone Thugs and Harmony and Migos. And of course, their podcast is based out of Indiana, so it's Midwest influence. So you would think it would be heavily Bone Thugs and Harmony, but actually most of the group or most of their podcast chose the Migos. Because the Migos is a younger group. They grew up with the Migos more than they probably grew up with Bone Thugs and Harmony. But is this really a debate? Because both of the groups are different musically and sonically, and their messaging and the production and what they rap about and just the eras that they grew up in or performed in were different. So, one group is from the South, which is Migos, and then Bone Thugs and Harmony is from the Midwest. But Bone Thugs has been active for over 30 years. They started in the early 90s, up and they're still current to today. So they have this major catalog or big bodies of work, while Migos has been around, been active for 15 years. And of course, um, rest in peace to Takeoff. It's only two group members in their group, but Bone Thugs has a way more, they have more group members. But Bone Thugs and Harmony has a huge sample size. Migos has, maybe half a decade worth of work that we can really compete against their 30 years. So it's really an unfair comparison. But in a vacuum, who is the better group musically? Because, of course, this is subjective and it's about what you like and all of those different things. But, uh, just to talk about the stats, Migos has two albums that went platinum or better. Bone Thugs has two albums that sold at least four times platinum, and they have one platinum album and then another one that's gold. So they did this in an era where you had to sell records. There were no streaming predominantly. There were no digital sales mostly. So you had to get out and get the records. So it just shows your influence to be able to sell this many records. Because if I'm looking correctly, this is about over 10 million records sold, and these are physical copies mostly that they had to sell in the era where they were competing about, the top of the top. You were going against the Tupacs and Biggies and the Jay-Z's and the Nas's and Coolio's and Eminem's and no, I say Jay-Z, Eminem's and all of these, any of the huge rap artists, LL Cool J, all of the bigger artists they had to compete against in that time frame, and they were able to still sell 10 million records during this time frame. So it just shows you the talent that they had and the hits and the influence that they had, especially being from the Midwest when the Midwest didn't have a lot of influence. The Midwest influence really didn't come until the Eminem period in the late 90s. And then you had Nelly coming through. Then you had a lot of Chicago influence after that. But when Bone Thugs and Harmony was out, there wasn't a lot of Midwest influence. Um, Opposed to when Migos came out, the South was already primed. You had Lil Wayne, you had Outkast and what they did. You had Goody Mob, you had Scarface, you had 3 6 Mafia, you had Trick Daddy and Rick Ross and all these other influences that made the South hot. But when you think about the influence of what Bone Thugs and Harmony did for the Midwest, they were the influence. They started the movement, so to speak, for the Midwest because there wasn't a lot out, especially coming from Cleveland. There's not a lot of artists still to this day that really have come from Cleveland area. I mean, you have MGK and then you have Kid Cudi, but other than that, in the Midwest, in that Cleveland area or Ohio area, there's really not a lot of rap influence. You have Cameron who reps it, but he's from New York. You don't really have that much influence because Bone Thugs was an influence. Migos was just a influence, but Bone Thugs and Harmony was the influence. There's a huge difference in the matter because it's the chicken and egg type of thing. So, but I think Migos has a big influence because they have 43 songs that made it to the Hot 100. Bone Thugs, only has nine. Um, but they both only have one number one hit. Migos had Bad and Bougie went number one. Bone Thugs and Harmony had Crosswords that went top 100, were number one on the 100 charts. So Migos has a lot of influence as far as the charts go, but a lot of that is due to streaming and it's not physical sales or physical purchases and things like that. Bone Thugs and Harmony existed in the era where if you can equate it to today, they probably would have had that amount of hits on the in the top 100, but it's just a different time frame now. The way kids stream songs and way kids are repetitive with it. It's in playlists or the songs in playlists. So it's gonna get in the top 100 sometimes, and they have a lot of catchy hits. But Bone Thugs had made music that was emotionally driven. Songs like First of the Month and songs like Crossroads. They had a lot of songs that were socially conscious. Migos made a lot of stuff for the club, a lot of stuff for riding around, doing things, even getting tasks done, stuff like that. Bone Thugs is a moment in time where you had to be in a certain mood to listen to because you can't just be listening to Crossroads riding, being all emotional stuff. You might mess up the car or God forbid, wreck the car or something like that. But they made a lot of music like that and a lot of somber music that were made for their lifestyle, like First of the Month. A lot of those songs, even the song from the soundtrack from the Set It Off soundtrack, which is one of my favorite songs, is Days of Our Lives that they put out. It's a sadder song. It's a slower tempo. It's one of those songs that make an emotional connection. It's one of those kind of conscious hip hop songs, especially in this era. So Migos really don't have a song like that that you can put together like that. Solo in their solo work, yeah, you could say that with Offset and what he's been able to do. He's been doing a phenomenal job in his solo career. But they don't have those songs that make a connection that are cult classics because we know First of the Month and Crossroads are cult classics. Those are songs that forever you can't tell the story of hip hop without, especially in the '90s. It's one of those top songs. I don't think Migos has a song that you can't tell the story of hip hop without. And it's not a knock to Migos, but it's just the facts. Maybe in time as time go on, because that's why I say it's an unfair comparison. They still have a lot of time to still people sit with the music. They probably won't come out with another project, but yeah, it's just different. I think it's just different levels. And of course, it's gonna be with the time frame that you grew up in. As a kid, being at 7, 8 years old, I remember listening to Crossroads and things like that. And just hearing about Uncle Charles and all this stuff. That stuff was major as a kid. So the kids that grew up with Migos today have a different emotional connection to it. But I'm telling you, sonically, it's a different skill set, it's a different passion for the music. And Bone Thugs had so many different rap styles. Like they used to rap real fast and then they could rap slow. They had they really didn't have love songs, but they had songs that were slower tempo and more emotionally driven. But Migos pretty much had one style. It was just trap music and it was upbeat music and it was hippie and it was trendy. But Bone Thugs, I think, for the long haul and for sonically, but it's for sake of the conversation, I think it's an unfair comparison just because Bone Thugs and Harmony has double the amount of years active that Migos don't have. So it's still a lot of time to sit with their music opposed to Bone Thugs, which they've had 3 decades. Migos has only had a decade and a half to sit with their music, which doesn't even seem like that long. But that Thuggish Ruggish Bone, I think, Migos doesn't have one of those. So tell me what your thoughts about who's the better group between Migos and Bone Thugs and Harmony, and I know it'll be some discord because, like I said, it's really depends on the genre or the era that you grew up in, so it's a huge difference, but until next time, I'll see you next time.